Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here, site super moderator for Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com, and this video is going to be my non-spoiler video review for North and South Part 3. So I got my review copy just actually a while ago. I've literally just finished reading the comic. I read it twice ahead of this, and yeah, I just want to give some of my kind of initial impressions here. I haven't even started to do my written review just yet, where there'll be much more detailed thoughts. This video is more of just, as I said, my initial impressions having just read the book. Again, I'm going to keep it non-spoilers, but of course, some stuff I'm going to have to bring up to mention it. So, the usual kind of general thoughts to start things off. I like this book. It's enjoyable, it's fun, at times it's emotional. The art continues to be, really well done. The writing overall, I think, is very good. But I couldn't help but feel a little bit disappointed, a little bit underwhelmed having finished this book, this series, North and South. Part of it is just that I feel like this book really simplified a lot of the main plots to get to a resolution. In that I feel like Part 1 and Part 2 were building up a plot that was really presenting this issue, North versus South, and by the end of this book it's kind of like, did they resolve it? They kind of did for Katara, but it's like they forgot that there's more characters that have issues with this than just Katara. That, yes, Katara is the main focus of this story, of course, and she gets a lot of attention here. And overall what they do with her in terms of how she kind of comes to her resolution at the end is, I think, overall nicely done. But I really do think the book kind of forgets that there are Southerners protesting against all of this stuff that's happening. When Zuko and Quay arrive into the story, people are protesting their arrival as well. And I really don't feel the book does anything to really explain why the overall opinion on foreigners has changed within the South. It's changed for Katara, but what about the rest of the people? It's little things like that. The fact that they almost forget that Malik is a character. Malik isn't in this book. He is mentioned once, and then he's just never referenced again. But he just doesn't seem to be in this book at any point. Like Melina doesn't even mention him, what happened to him, if he's gone, if he's left, or if he's there in the South, but we just don't see him. It's really weird how that plays out. There's other little things as well, like when Zuko and Quay arrive, Suki's not with Zuko. And now, I don't feel they had to include Suki in this story, but if you're bringing Team Avatar together in the South for this kind of resolve this issue, why don't you have Zuko, who's going to a place where they kind of know there's going to be a little bit of a bad reaction, especially for Zuko being like the Fire Lord at this point in time, and the Southern Water Tribe was affected by the Fire Nation. Now, of course, to some degree, the people of the South probably know that Zuko is not necessarily the, one behind all of that, but still, he should have some security in the South, and he has some guards with him, of course, but why isn't his, actual bodyguard, Suki, there? She's a member of Team Avatar, and I don't really think it's a spoiler, but, Hakoda kind of figuring out that the team calls himself Team Avatar is a little bit of a notable point in this book. And so he's like, yeah, seeing Team Avatar work together, and it's just this thing of okay, everyone's here in Team Avatar except Suki. It just really feels like, again, she's forgotten, because you get, obviously nice little moments between, Zuko and Sokka, buddies, of course, when they see each other again. But it would have been nice to get, Sokka, who hasn't really got the best attention in this series, have Suki there and just have a little moment with her seeing her boyfriend's, home village, home nation for the first time. How did they miss that opportunity? Little things like that they just kind of forgot, because I do think there's a couple of pages within this book where I feel like they don't necessarily need to spend that much time on it. I don't want to spoil it too much, but the first couple of pages, which will probably be the preview, involves Toph's metal bending students. So they're in the South. The metal bending students are in the South, basically trying to help construct some, things out of metal in the South, and they're kind of struggling because they're not used to metal bending while having to also deal with all the snow being around. And I just feel like they spend a little bit too much time, a few too many pages on the, the metal bending students and Toph, and just basically coming to the conclusion that, like, yeah, this would be much more easier to do if we had waterbenders here in addition to metal benders. But the only southern waterbender is not interested in developing new technology here. And then because of politics, we can't use northern waterbenders. So they just kind of create some, like, a slight thing of just like, hey, politics, is getting in the way of business, and then move on. There's definitely points in this book where, like, I thought part 3 was going to be packed. It was going to struggle to resolve everything. And it kind of does, but it does in part because I don't feel it uses the page count incredibly well. It comes across to me, obviously, I'm being, like, pretty critical of this book, but it is one of those things where, like, it's a part 3. You expect a decent amount of resolution, and we get it, but it's also not exactly the way you would want it, I don't think. I think people, when they read this book, again, I think it'll be a somewhat similar reaction to North and South Part 2, where a couple of key scenes will be focused on. Like, from Part 2, say, the Katara and Hakoda talk, Katara's reaction to Aang coming back, the Hakoda stabbing scene. Those scenes will get the attention. There's those type of scenes in Part 3. But I think the core plot of, like, Part 3 as the resolution to the overall North and South story, I think that's where the attention isn't as kind of focused on. And that's where I feel like ultimately it hasn't worked so well, in that we're ultimately trying to really, on a broad level, lead towards where things are in Korra, with regards to Yu Dao eventually becoming the United Republic, Republic City. And we sort of get that here, obviously, with the idea that most of the world leaders are down in the South here. But it's more about the South's involvement with the rest of the world, as opposed to the world coming together to make decisions about the world. So it's more about the South rather than anything about United Republic, really, as such. And it just kind of repeats the general theme of where the comics have been so far, of just like the world is getting to a point where the nations are beginning to mix a bit more, and we have to accept that that is just a normal thing. And that's a fine kind of theme to have and to bring together. It's just, it has been covered a little bit already in, The Promise, primarily, but like a little bit all over the place with The Rift and so on. What else? I think Gilak was a little bit of a disappointment in this book, in that I actually liked him as a villain in the first 2 parts, in that I feel like his ideals were challenging everyone, and he was actually on the verge of potentially becoming this, like, leader that a lot of people were getting behind. And again, it comes down to the fact that, again, the book doesn't really resolve a lot of what it's trying to do with the Southerners. The people who are protesting against what's happening with all the people, the Northerners coming in, they're just kind of left there. And I think we're just meant to assume, with how they resolve Gilak, that those people realize who he is and change their mind. It's a bit weird how it didn't properly all come together here at the end. And with Gilak specifically, it just feels like they, again, simplified him for this part for the sake of resolving the story, in that he kind of just ends up being presented as a little bit of a madman, as opposed to where he was before, admittedly having some very harsh and heavy ideals, but at least you could get behind the core of what he was going for. He was kind of like a Korra villain in that sense, of like, he had an idea and maybe he was taking it too far, but there was a core behind what that was, and I don't feel they necessarily approached that all that well. Again, I think the strength of this book is the character moments, like little interactions between, say, Zuko and Sokka. Quay is actually quite funny when he arrives, because he obviously brings Bosco with him, and there's some fun moments with Bosco, just with the art, and the other characters interacting with the fact that it's just, for them, this really weird animal of just a normal bear right there in the south next to them, and that's kind of covered a bit. Hakoda obviously is present in the story that, like, because of Katara, of course, his injuries aren't like, he's not just bedridden for the entire book. He's injured, he's not fully fit, but because of the healing, he's more or less back on his feet. So they kind of cover that. They kind of skip past the fact that part two kind of ended on a little bit of a cliffhanger. That, like, Hakoda was calling Melina in to his hospital, like his bedroom, basically, to tell her something. Like, Katara is really annoyed with Melina. And it feels like by the start of this book, they kind of forget that that's where part two left off. So if it ends up kind of feeling to me that, like, part three was almost written in a vacuum. That they, not that they just completely forgot everything about part one and two, but that they didn't necessarily think about the fact that the start of part three should be the continuation of part two. It is, but it doesn't directly link in that we never find out what exactly Hakoda said to Melina. And we never, like, until, like, the very end, we don't get, like, a scene of Katara and Melina talking. And even that resolution is like, okay, I see what they were doing, but it's maybe not the most satisfying resolution either to that. So it's a weird one, in that, again, as I said, once more people read this book and there's a bit of reaction out there about the book, I think people will enjoy it, but I think it probably will end up being considered, like, overall as a story, a trilogy, one of the weaker ones, just because it is more of the highlights are more about the character interactions and the return to the South, rather than the plot as such. Whereas I think most of the other comics, The Promise, like with the whole plot point of Aang and Zuko at odds with each other over the decisions and so on, with Zuko and talking with Ozai in the background, that was well done. The Search, of course, with the huge focus on Ursa, Azula being brought back into the story, and just that the mystery of that had the attention in terms of the plot. The Rift had a nice plot as well, because we got backstory with, like, Yang Chen, spiritual development for Aang, Toph and Aang development, Toph development with her father. The plot of that worked. Smoke and Shadow had great May development. You know, you had Ty Lee be a little bit more of a focus within the story. You, towards the end, brought Azula back in and did some important things with her, and while you didn't do everything, you at the very least, you know, set up an interesting position for her. I think people are going to reflect back on North and South and kind of realize that perhaps the plot is kind of there, but it's not the focus. It's definitely more about, like, Katara's returning to the South. How does she feel about how things are now? And it's more of a character piece rather than a plot thing. And I think there was a lot of speculation about where exactly they go with the plot, and I'm not sure everyone's going to be completely happy with where it ends up. In that, again, we still don't know what's next for Avatar Comics. Like, in the PDF that I got, obviously, I don't get a lot of the advertising stuff, so I don't know if the actual, you know, copy that you buy is going to have that page at the end of the book that's like, coming next, you know, part one of this comic series. I think what's going to happen is it's going to be like the Rift Part 3, where you get to the final page and there's no initial announcement. I think we're going to get like this, last page of the Rift, and there's no immediate advertisement for what's next, because at the time when obviously this came out, Smoke and Shadow hadn't really been announced properly just yet. So I feel it's either going to be a Turf Wars preview for North and South Part 3 or nothing there. That'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I'm just going to end it there and just kind of, again, I overall liked the book, but I feel there's almost more to talk about regards to what this book didn't really do than there is about what it did do, which is unfortunate, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that we don't know what's next. We don't know if we're ever going to get more development on what's going on in the South. We're not even sure if we're going to get resolution on the Azula story. We're just in a very awkward position right now with Avatar Comics, and so it's kind of disappointing to kind of at least potentially go on a bit of a hiatus for Avatar Comics at the very least, and it kind of end on not the greatest note, given that there's been, I think, better comics before this. So I don't want to like completely destroy people's expectations for this book, and that people will get, I think, a lot of excitement and enjoyment out of a lot of character interactions and certain scenes, and that it is a, I enjoyed reading it. Like, I read it twice within like the space of an hour, and I enjoyed both times reading it. It just, you know, as a overall series, the end of North and South, it didn't really come together perfectly for me. But that's my initial review, my initial thoughts on the book. In the comments, let me know how excited you are for North and South, and then I will, of course, try and get my written review, non-spoiler review up for this book, and then full spoiler reviews will be out day of the release of this book, which is April 26th, and you'll get all of the thoughts. There'll be a podcast review. We'll go super in-depth when that time comes. But for now, we're keeping it somewhat general, but giving you a tease about what the book is actually about. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.